another edition of the Deals for Dentists podcast. Today we have Jason James. He is zooming out of Vancouver, and he is the president of diplomatic.ai. And Jason, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having us here.
So you can go to dealsfordentists.com and find Diplomatic's promo offer, which is $0 out of pocket, profitable revenue stream. And it's called Compassionate Collections. So Jason, tell me all about Diplomatic AI and how you help dentists.
Absolutely. So the number one thing right now is we're coming out of a pandemic. There's all types of issues going on. There's a lack of hygienists. There's a lot of issues. And the number one thing that we help with is just getting additional cash flow. And this is cash flow where there's zero out-of-pocket expense and there's no repayment required. So what we're doing that's different than everyone else is we've partnered with the top collection agencies that are actually compassionate, meaning they don't disrupt the lifestyle of patients. And we're able to place the debt with an agency that actually follows the guidelines that you want. For example, it could be email only, it could be a combination of calls and letters, and we're able to go back outside the statute of limitation if you're comfortable with it, or we can remain within it. So we're able to tailor the experience according to what each practice actually wants, as opposed to you just willy-nilly picking any agency and praying that it works out for you.
Okay, so Diplomatic is not necessarily, it's not a collections agency. It's more of like a platform that helps us get matched or choose a collection agency. Is that right?
Yeah, so we manage the entire process. One of the things when you're going back to collect debts that are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years back is there's a lack of up-to-date contact information. So if you were to go directly to a collection agency, they would literally just take all of this out-of-date information, call it, and then say, hey, we tried our best. Now, the difference with us is we go out of pocket to do what's called skip tracing, which is getting the up-to-date contact information of folks, because you know how modern times are, people change phone numbers and emails all the time. So you need to get that up-to-date contact information, because truth be told, the number one reason why most folks are unhappy with their collection agency is because the recovery rate is low. And the reason for that is quite simple. They just don't make contact with enough people. So the way to do that is to pay out of pocket, which we cover, of course, to get that up-to-date contact information. So the more people you contact, the more you're able to get in touch with and get started with a payment plan and ultimately have a higher recovery rate.
So your traditional collection agency, they're just not keeping up to date contact information, so they're not getting a hold of these patients. Is that the biggest issue, where they're not collecting the
It's actually the responsibility of the practice to maintain up-to-date contact information. But as you know, patients move out of state, they go elsewhere. So you're not necessarily updating that contact information on a regular basis. So when it gets passed to collections, essentially what's happening is you're sending over a bunch of out-of-date contact information. So then when the collections process initiates, you're literally just wasting a bunch of time calling a bunch of information that's no longer even relevant.
So skip tracing, is that like a patient tries to skip town and you can't find them and you got to get their updated contact info? Is that
skip tracing is just simply the practice of getting up-to-date contact information for folks.
Gotcha. Okay, so now you call it compassionate collections, and is that because, like, for example, my practice, it's a family practice. We're very much part of the community. My kids go to school here. I see patients in the grocery store, at Trader Joe's, at the restaurants, and I want to keep that relationship going, and I want to keep a good rapport with these patients. Is that why it's called compassionate?
The reason it's called compassionate is because there's a couple different approaches to collections. For example, if you're going after a commercial account, like a vendor that failed to supply you with what you paid for, you might be inclined to be more aggressive because you're upset that you paid for a product or service and they failed to deliver it. But when you're talking about patients, right, like the ones you may see in your community or at church on Sunday, you want to be compassionate in the sense that they did come in, you did provide them care and treatment, they do owe you this amount, and then they failed to pay. So there's a couple different approaches. If you send them to a nasty collection agency, they will call, they'll hound them, they'll be very aggressive. And that's not what we want. So what we're looking for is to get them with an agency that truly is compassionate. And the difference between compassionate and not compassionate is being gentle on the phone, offering solutions, and saying, instead of saying, hey, look, you have an outstanding balance of $868, you need to pay this now. We would say something to the effect of, hey, are you able to cover the full amount today? And if they say no, which happens most of the time, you'd say, hey, why don't we do a split pay? Would that work for you? And if they say no, that's fair too. Then we can say, what can you comfortably afford on a monthly basis? And if they say, hey, look, with my fixed income, I can only do 150 a month, then we just get them on a payment plan that does not disrupt their lifestyle. And that's how we allow patients to maintain their integrity and their lifestyle while satisfying their obligation to you.
So I could be like, hey, listen, I saw you at Abe and Louie's last night eating like $100 steak, like, you know, and you owe me $1,000. Come on, let's make this happen. So you can actually put them on a payment plan. And is that like a 12-month, or is that customizable? How does that work?
Yeah, it's customizable according to, you know, what the actual amount is, right? So it depends, how big is that debt? Is it an outstanding debt of $200? Maybe it was just hygiene, or maybe it's cosmetic dentistry, and we're looking at multiple thousands of dollars. So it really just depends on what is the total amount, and then also rewarding them. So if they do jump on a payment plan right away, then of course we have what's called settlement authority. So we're able to just shave off some of the amount that's owed, just to reward them for actually jumping on that payment plan without needing to, you know, hound them.
Okay. Yeah. So, you know, do you find that every practice is different, and, you know, some dental offices want to collect every penny, whereas, you know, mine, I may say, you know, I know these patients, I'll write some off, or I'll give them a little break, or is every dental office just completely different?
We kind of notice it, I would place it in two different schools. So some of them are quite aggressive and they say, hey, look, I provided these products and services. You know, my overhead is really high. I need every penny I can get. And then there's more of the compassionate side. And the way we coach them through that process is very simple. We just say, look, you are in control. If there's certain patients that you do not want to send to collections, we'll walk you through the process of how to remove those from your database before you push them to collections. Meaning, if there's anybody over the age of 80 or terminally ill or whatever that criteria is, remove them from the spreadsheet before you submit it, so that we never even have their contact information in the first place. And that's the way to safeguard against contacting people and then having that back and forth.
So what does it mean when you call yourself a second placement AR recovery program?
Great. So second placement. Okay. So first placement is when you send your accounts to the initial collection agency. So let's just start from the beginning of the process. You provided care to patients, and then most likely you have your billing coordinator or office manager call for 30, 60, 90, perhaps 120 days internally, right? And then when you failed, whatever you failed to collect at that point goes to a collection agency. And what typically happens is they just send a couple letters, or they call for maybe 6 months, maybe a year, and then typically they stop. So if you were to contact your collection agency right now and ask for what's called an activity report, you would see a massive drop off around that point. So second placement simply means that you've already placed it once with the first collection agency. You're probably sitting on hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of old accounts receivables going back, whatever the statute of limitation is in your state. So that amount that you failed to collect after already passing it to collections, that's the second placement, meaning it goes to us after you've already placed it once. Now you're on the second placement. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Perfect.
Now, do collection agencies, what is their like typical, would you say, recovery rate? And is that so different between, you know, like let's say I have a heavy PPO, or I'm a mass health type of practice versus a fee for service practice, or urban versus suburban versus rural? Is it just every practice is so different?
Absolutely. So there's so many factors that come into play. Sometimes there's lower income demographics. Those ones typically are harder to collect from. So the recovery rate can be lower, as opposed to if you're in Beverly Hills, obviously it's a lot easier because it's a wealthier area. So there's a lot of factors that come into play. Also the age of the debt, right? So if you call somebody from let's say 6 months ago, they may still remember the care that you provided. But if you call them 2, 3, 4 years later, they may not even recall. And then you
Mhm.
have to jog their memory. You need to provide the supporting documentation, whatever patient responsibility claims you have, and producing that documentation then jogs their memory. And, that's how you're able to help move them towards a payment plan and get a higher recovery rate.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah, I owe you for that implant you placed. I owe you that $1,000. I forgot about it.
Yeah,
Um,
sorry about that. Just
yeah, I
slipped my
just,
mind for the last
I
few
just,
years.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Now, I imagine that with we have two PPO in network plans, and it just gets so confusing with write-offs and coverage and annual maximums, and a lot of times there's miscommunication with patients, and I think that's where a lot of these uh, this AR can come into play versus if I was just a total fee for service practice where this is the cost, this is what you owe me. When you start adding PPO plans, it just makes everything so much more tricky and difficult. Do you find the same thing?
We stay independent of that. So
Mhm.
that's up to the practice to figure out what their situation is with insurance. And typically, since we're second placement, we start the process where you've already kind of tried and failed with insurance, you've already recoded, resubmitted, and you're just at that point where it's a patient responsibility claim, right? So all the things that you're talking about happen earlier in the AR recovery cycle, and we're there to kind of clean it up at the end.
What happens if you just can't get a hold of someone and they just let's say they owe me, $500 and I really want to collect that money and you just can't get a hold of them. What happens then? Do you send like Soprano style, like some baseball bats to collect, or how does that work?
Those days are over.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, especially with Biden Harris, that administration would not allow for
Yeah,
anything
it
like
wouldn't
that.
it wouldn't happen. Yeah.
Yeah, so the key is to get the proper up-to-date contact information in the event that you can't get that information. I mean, there's not much you can do if you can't contact
Mhm.
folks. But the key with compassionate collections is just to be persistent. And what we mean by that is if you send it to a traditional collection agency, they may call a couple times, send a couple letters, and then just give up. But the reality is, especially in today's economy, a lot of folks are struggling financially. So what you need to do is call and stay in touch with them the maximum legally allotted time per state regulation. Because what happens is during tax season, there's a refund. They may have the surplus funds to pay off, the debt that they owe the practice. Or another time is when there's a stimulus check, right? Then all of a sudden they have an influx, and that's when they're in a better position to start on that payment plan. So you just need to be in touch with them regularly to catch them at the right time.
And now, did you say there was a legal amount of time where is it like a year where you can keep in touch with them, and then after that, is there a law where it says you can't continue to, I guess, like, I don't know the word, harass these patients? How does that work?
Yeah, so every state is very, very different, right? So there is a maximum amount of times you're allowed to contact a patient on, let's
Hmm.
say, a weekly or a monthly basis. And then also there's statute of limitations within each state. So for example, in Maryland, you can only go back 3 years. In Rhode Island, it's 10 years. Most states are 4, 5, 6 years. So of course, we need to be aware of that and follow all the regulations.
That wasn't a good word I used, harass. Compassionately contact the patient.
Compassionately harass people would
Yes.
not be
Yeah.
something that would be a good way to describe this, but
So
I
do
get it.
you call, email, and text, or how do you get in touch with the patients?
Great question. So that goes back to what makes us unique, right? So a lot of practices, they'll say, look, I really want you to be sensitive and don't even call them. They're going through a hard time. So in that instance, we would just do perhaps an email only approach. So there's certain agencies that specialize just in doing a digital approach. And then there's other practices that say, hey, look, I would really prefer if you went the traditional route, which is more along the lines of calling, sending letters, credit reporting to gently nudge them towards making a payment plan. So it really is at the discretion of the practice to decide how aggressive they want to be in that approach. And we are there to listen to what they want.
Okay. Yeah, because I just personally, if I see a strange number, I'm not answering the phone. I'd rather get an email or
Mhm.
a text or but um, why would you? I read on your website your white glove. What does that mean, being white glove service?
Great question. So typically, if you just call a collection agency, they're just going to tell you any old thing, kind of like a marketer, right? They say, "Oh, I specialize in helping realtors," and that might not translate to helping dentists, right? So same thing with most collection agencies. They're just happy to get the business, and they're going to tell you any old story just to land your account, just so that they can make those first few calls and send a couple letters and catch the lowest hanging fruit. And then they do what's called shelving your account, meaning they just disregard it essentially.
Hmm.
With us, we're here to be very compassionate and actually give you the experience that you want. Going back to what you were saying earlier, you might see folks in church or in the community, so you might want a gentler approach. So the whole thing is having a consultative white glove approach means that we're able to ask you, what do you want? How do you want your patients to be treated? Would you prefer an email only approach? Are you okay with calling? Are you okay with credit reporting? Would you prefer not? So we just go through this process to make sure that your philosophy at your practice aligns with how you want these debts recovered for you.
So if I wanted to, have the patients, you know, can I ding their credit? Let's say they're just not answering. They owe a lot of money. We have the right contact information. How does that work with their credit? Does it depend on how much money they owe, or how does that work?
So if you are interested in credit reporting and you just told that to us right up front, we would say, okay, great. So we work with a compassionate agency that does credit report. And typically that happens around month 2 or 3, because in all fairness, you do need to give them a chance to do what's
Mm,
right. So a couple phone calls, like you said, you don't answer the call because it's anonymous. So we do leave voicemails. And then after getting called several times, you will notice, hey, something's changed here. Maybe I should respond to this. And they have several months before you escalate the situation to credit reporting.
okay. Now, would you say your mission is to help dentists and dental offices with their cash flow and just collect money that they're owed? Because after COVID, our overhead went up, our wages were the same, but our productivity is down because of capacity issues. So just collecting every dime that we can and getting that cash flow is so important for us. Would you say, is that your mission?
Yeah, so our official mission is actually to get $100 billion back to healthcare providers, lenders, and businesses by 2024 without anybody going out of pocket. So when we went back to the drawing board, we were trying to figure out what are the ways that we can get more cash flow to practices without any objections. Obviously, there's no price objection because we never even need a credit card on file. We never send you an invoice. It's always us paying you on the 22nd of every month, period. So there's no price objection, unlike when you sell a product or service or marketing. And secondarily, we're here to do it the way that you want, right? So you don't have to have that fear that you're going to go to a really nasty collection agency. You can go the compassionate route. You're in control. And yeah, absolutely. The whole goal is just like you said, costs went up. It's very hard to retain staff right now. There's a lot of issues, and having this extra cash flow coming in on a monthly basis where it doesn't require any extra work, no out of pocket expense, no repayment, it really is a blessing. And it warms our heart to know that we're able to make a positive contribution financially to practices.
So you said on a monthly basis, does that go like immediately into our checking account, or do you send us a check? How does that work?
Yeah, so we just wire you on the 22nd of every month, a percentage
Okay.
of what's collected in the previous month.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, as dentists, first of all, we weren't taught any of this in dental school. We
I
know
get it.
fillings and crowns, and we don't want to be dealing with this. We work hard and we want to get paid for our work, but we also don't want to ruin that patient relationship if they do owe money. If they're a good patient that maybe they're going through a hard time or whatever it is, we don't want to ruin that relationship, and we want to keep them long term and have them refer their friends and family. So there's a fine line there where, yes, we want to collect what we're owed, but we don't want the patient to leave the practice. So I think this is a great thing that you're doing.
Thank you.
Um, so as an entrepreneur, what advice would you give to young dentists or just young entrepreneurs out there?
Well, our expertise is purely on the AR recovery side. So one of the things that I would say is make sure that you have your paperwork in order, because if you're not able to provide the supporting documentation, then if somebody disputes the debt, you have 30 days to produce that documentation to say, hey, yes, on this date, you got this care or this treatment. And if you fail to produce that, it invalidates the debt. So first of all, make sure your paperwork is in order. Work with the practice management group to make sure that your paperwork is as it should be. Secondarily, have your front desk staff call internally. Just stay on top of it, because the recovery rate on debt within the first 30, 60, 90 days is infinitely higher than when you wait, right? So make sure that you have a very seamless process where you have protocols in place for your staff to take care of it. And then what I would say is, work with somebody that you actually trust that's going to get your debt placed with an agency that actually listens to you and your mantra and your culture of how you want your practice to be. Because the worst situation is if you just randomly Google a collection agency, you send it to them, and next thing you know, you have patients upset and calling, and then they're not rescheduling. That's the problem that we're solving, is making sure that they're placed with an agency that is very compassionate. If for whatever reason you want to remove somebody, it's literally just a phone call, or you can go into the portal and just say, hey, look, this patient, just remove them from collections. And it happens immediately, right? So having that open line of communication is incredibly important.
Now, what would you say the collection percentage is? 30, 60, 90? Is it like an inverse relationship where, after 30 days, within 30 days, it's a 90%, and then you get to 60 days and it's 60%, and then 90 days, like 30%? What are you seeing there? After you get to 90 days, is it really difficult to collect?
So typically we're not involved at that stage, right? So that comes down to the individual practice. So that really is a function of your front desk team. How diligent are they? Are you calling? Are you leaving voicemails? Are you texting? Are you emailing? Are you calling once a week, once a month? So that, to answer your question, it's all over the map, right? Some practices are very aggressive and they're on it, and some just let it linger. And that's the reason that practices can accumulate hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of debt over the years, because they're not on top of it in the first 30, 60, 90, 120 days.
Okay. Yeah. So, this is just money that, I'd be watching the bank account on every, the 22nd, seeing what comes in. I mean, it's really risk-free, correct? For the dentist, it's all, your company is all performance-based, right?
100% performance-based, absolutely. So the other question that we do get asked quite a bit is, what is the fee? What is the cost, right? So since we are taking on the entire recovery cost, we just have a quick consultation, and we just need to understand what is the volume of debt, what is the average balance, what state are you in, just a few things like that. And then by the end of the call, we offer a percentage, right? So for X dollars that we collect, we retain this amount, and the balance is paid to you on the 22nd of every month. But it's what you said. This is money you otherwise would never get, right? So either you place it and we work together and you get an extra additional revenue stream coming in every month, or you just write it off and you never get it. And the longer you linger, the harder it is to collect. Yep. So eventually it becomes, truly uncollectible if you let it linger long enough.
Now, does Diplomatic work with other health professions, or are dentists the only suckers out there, or do you just work with dental offices?
No, we work with all different healthcare providers.
And are dentists like the top of the list as far as AR and?
I wouldn't say top of the list, because most dentists are pretty on top of their AR situation. It would be more along the lines of higher dollar amount. So that would be surgeons. If you're doing a surgery for 50 grand, 100 grand, or a hospital system, they're notorious for letting AR linger. So they may have 20, 30, 40 million in AR over 3-4 years. Most dentists probably don't have tens of millions in outstanding accounts receivables, thankfully for them, right?
Now, what's your journey? How did you get involved with this business?
Great question. So I was more on the patient care coordination side. And that's more helping answer the phones and doing recalls and reappointments and just different things to help the front desk, nurturing leads because you're paying a marketer, Facebook ads, a couple grand a month. And then what you notice is that your front desk staff doesn't have the time to call them. So I was doing a lot of remote administrative services. But then when the pandemic hit and there were certain shifts happening, I noticed that people don't want an extra expense, right? Because at the end of the day, anything that you need to pay every month is an expense. So then what we did was we just went back to the drawing board and we said, what can we do to add value in the form of cash flow where there truly is no out-of-pocket expense? So then we decided to, shift gears towards, what we're doing now.
Okay, awesome. Jason James, president of diplomatic.ai. Again, you can go to Deals for Dentists. You can find their promo offer, $0 out of pocket, profitable revenue stream, compassionate collections. Jason, any last words of wisdom that you want to share with those young dentists out there?
Just get on top of it from day one, right? Because at the end of the day, especially with today's economy, times are tough. We don't have a positive outlook overall for the economy. You're probably seeing this already. So being on top of your AR earlier in the cycle is just going to mean that you're going to have a better financial situation and you're not going to let it linger. And 3, 4, 5 years from now, come to me and say, hey, look, I have $1 million that's owed to me. It's better if you can just collect as much upfront as possible because you know that you need that cash flow to support your expenses on a monthly basis. So the faster you can get on top of it, the better your lifestyle is going to be. And that ties into you, right? Being a stress-free dentist means collecting the money you're owed as soon as possible. And it really comes down to lifestyle at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, and me likey the cashy. And this is, like I said before, we worked hard for this revenue, and we have, our overhead is not cheap. And this is money that you're owed. So like you said, keep on top of it, and keep, everything well documented. So Jason, thanks so much for joining us. Let's be in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you very, very much.
All right. Take care.
All right. Thank you.